James Barry's name carried the weight of trust in his small town, but behind the image of a hardworking mechanic was a secret that would lead to his brutal end. His wife struggled with unanswered questions, his neighbors recalled strange late-night visits, and his cousin Daniel, seemingly loyal and supportive, was hiding the darkest truth of all. As the layers of betrayal unraveled, the shocking reality emerged. The real danger wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but someone James had trusted within his own family. James Barry was a familiar figure in the small town where everyone seemed to know everyone. He was a mechanic who had built his reputation on honesty and skill, often staying late in his garage to finish jobs for customers who trusted him completely. On a cold November evening, however, James made an unusual choice. Instead of staying late, he locked up the garage earlier than usual. A neighbor saw him walk out, wiping his hands with a rag, and toss it into a bin before climbing into his truck. He seemed calm, not in a rush, and mentioned he would be home soon for dinner. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. When James failed to return home that night, his wife grew concerned. At first, she thought maybe he had stopped to help someone on the road or gone to see a friend, but the hours stretched longer and longer. By midnight, her worry turned into dread. She called his phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. The next morning, she filed a missing persons report, and the case began. Police acted quickly because James was not the type to vanish without explanation. The search led them to an isolated road outside of town, where his truck was discovered. The sight was unsettling. The driver's side door was wide open, the key still dangling in the ignition, and his phone was not inside. Even stranger, the vehicle showed no signs of forced entry or a struggle. To anyone looking from the outside, it was as though James had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. Officers scoured the area, checking ditches, wooded patches, and nearby fields, but there was nothing. It was as if James had been swallowed by the night. The disappearance shook the town. People speculated wildly. Some believed he had been kidnapped. Others wondered if he had secret troubles he had hidden from everyone. To his family, those ideas felt impossible. James was dedicated, steady, and deeply rooted in the life he had built. The mystery of the abandoned truck only deepened their fear. His wife clung to hope, convinced he would walk through the door at any moment, while detectives quietly suspected that something darker had already unfolded. James Barry was missing, and no one could explain why. 3 long days passed before the search for James Barry took a devastating turn. A jogger running along the riverbank noticed a foul odor and a mound of leaves piled unnaturally near the edge of the water. Curiosity quickly turned to horror when the discovery was made. Beneath the leaves lay the lifeless body of James. News spread quickly through the town, and what had begun as a missing person case instantly shifted into a homicide investigation. The condition of his body left no doubt that he had met a violent end. His face was swollen and bruised, his clothes torn, and his injuries suggested a savage beating that went far beyond an accident. The brutality shocked even the most experienced officers on the scene. The medical examiner's findings were even more chilling. James had not died immediately. Instead, he had suffered for hours before his final breath. This revelation raised disturbing questions about what had truly happened during the time he was missing. Whoever was responsible had not only killed him, but had deliberately inflicted pain, leaving investigators to wonder if this was a crime of personal rage rather than a random act of violence. No weapon was found nearby, and his wallet and watch were still on him, ruling out robbery as a motive. Whoever killed James had done so with intent and had tried to conceal the body poorly, as though working in haste or desperation. Detectives combed through the area, collecting every scrap of potential evidence. They searched for tire tracks, footprints, or discarded items that might point to the killer, but the riverbank was bare except for James's remains. The river itself complicated matters, as its currents could have washed away important clues. Still, the discovery of the body was a turning point, giving the investigation its first real lead. Officers marked the scene, photographing every detail, but the puzzle remained incomplete. The town's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fear spread quickly as people realized that someone capable of such violence was living among them. The streets grew quieter at night, and neighbors began locking their doors earlier than usual. The brutality of the murder cast a shadow over the community, replacing speculation with dread. James Barry's death was no longer just a tragic disappearance, it was a brutal crime that demanded justice, and detectives knew the answers would not come easily. Detectives quickly shifted their focus toward the people closest to James Berry. Believing that such a brutal and personal crime was unlikely to have been carried out by a stranger, his family and friends were questioned extensively, and the layers of James's life slowly began to unravel. What had seemed like a stable marriage began to reveal cracks. His wife admitted that arguments had become frequent in recent months, mostly about money. She had noticed large sums being withdrawn from their bank account without explanation, and James had brushed off her concerns with vague answers. Investigators began to wonder if James had been hiding something far more serious than financial stress. Neighbors also provided intriguing details. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, several residents noticed unfamiliar cars parked near his garage late at night. Some assumed he was meeting clients after hours, but others whispered that the meetings looked secretive, almost like exchanges. A close friend revealed that James had recently confided in him about trouble with the wrong people, though he never gave specifics. These small fragments painted a troubling picture, suggesting James had become entangled in something he couldn't control. At the same time, detectives couldn't ignore the strained relationships within his inner circle. Suspicion naturally fell on his wife, not only because she was the closest person to him but also because her emotions seemed conflicted. While devastated, she admitted feeling angry at the secrets he kept, which gave investigators reason to keep her under scrutiny. Yet without physical evidence, nothing tied her to the crime. The possibility of an affair was also considered, as whispers circulated that James might have been involved with someone outside his marriage. If true, this could explain the passion and rage seen in his injuries. As investigators pieced together these theories, the town grew restless. Every new rumor seemed to add fuel to the fire, making it harder to separate fact from speculation. Some believed James was a victim of criminal dealings. Others insisted the motive was buried within his family life. For detectives, the challenge was clear: to cut through the noise and find a lead that pointed directly to the killer. At that stage, though, the evidence remained scattered, and suspicion hovered over nearly everyone who had been close to James Berry. Weeks passed with the investigation circling around theories but producing no concrete answers, until a small detail began to change everything. Detectives decided to re-examine James Berry's abandoned truck, this time with a sharper eye for overlooked evidence. Under the pedals, they discovered faint traces of mud that didn't match the dirt of the road where the vehicle had been found. Samples were taken and compared, and the results were startling. The mud matched the soil near the riverbank where James's body had been discovered. This detail confirmed that the killer had driven the truck after James was already dead, staging the scene to make it look like James had left the vehicle voluntarily. Suddenly, the investigation shifted from guessing motives to proving deliberate deception. Attention then turned to James's recent conflicts. Detectives uncovered that James had confronted a local businessman known for his shady dealings and reputation for intimidation. Records revealed James had been pressuring him over an unpaid debt tied to questionable side jobs that James had reluctantly taken on. The businessman had both the motive and the violent temper to lash out. He quickly became the primary suspect, and the town began to believe the mystery was finally unraveling. Officers prepared to build a case, focusing on his movements during the night James disappeared. But before the businessman could be charged, another surprising twist surfaced. Fingerprint analysis on the interior of James's truck revealed something unexpected: prints belonging to individuals who should never have been inside. While some matched James's family and neighbors, one stood out as unusual and suspicious. Detectives began to question whether the businessman had been set up, his reputation used as a convenient scapegoat to divert attention away from the true killer. The discovery reignited the case, forcing investigators to widen their scope once again. The idea of a carefully staged scene meant the killer had not only been close enough to James to know his habits, but also clever enough to manipulate evidence. Someone within his circle, someone trusted, had likely orchestrated the deception. The growing realization was chilling. What had once seemed like an attack driven by rage might have been a calculated effort to eliminate James and mislead authorities. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. But the image they revealed was far darker and more personal than anyone in the community had imagined. The turning point came when forensic testing confirmed that one of the fingerprints inside James Berry's truck belonged not to the feared businessman, but to a man who had quietly slipped under the radar throughout the investigation: his wife's cousin, Daniel. At first, Daniel had been seen as little more than a grieving relative who often visited the family to provide support, but deeper digging uncovered a pattern of behavior that quickly changed the perspective of investigators. Bank records showed that Daniel had access to James's financial information and had been funneling money from his accounts for months. The unexplained withdrawals that had strained James's marriage were not his doing at all. Instead, they were the actions of someone far closer to home, someone he trusted enough not to question. Detectives pieced together a timeline of the night James disappeared. Evidence suggested James confronted Daniel after discovering the theft. What began as a heated argument escalated into violence, with Daniel striking James repeatedly. The injuries revealed by the medical examiner now made sense: not a random attack, but a furious outburst from someone desperate to keep his secret hidden. After James collapsed, Daniel panicked, dragging the body to the riverbank in an attempt to conceal it. In a hasty effort to divert suspicion, he staged the truck to appear as though James had stepped away voluntarily, planting the seeds for a misleading narrative. What shocked the town most was not just the brutality of the act, but the cold calculation that followed. Daniel continued to present himself as supportive, sitting beside James's widow, attending community searches, and offering comfort while knowing the truth of what he had done. The deception was so thorough that, for weeks, investigators had chased false leads, wasting precious time. When the truth finally came out, the betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. This was not the work of a distant enemy or a violent stranger, but of someone bound by blood and family ties. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, leaving many to question how well they truly knew the people around them. For James's family, the answers brought no comfort, only a painful confirmation that trust had been fatally misplaced. The brutal murder of James Barry ended not with the unmasking of a feared outsider, but with the exposure of a relative who had lived in their shadow all along. The tragedy was not only the loss of a life, but the revelation of how close darkness can hide behind a familiar face.